Hello Legacy Sabers, Marsh here. So today we're going to look at random numbers, static variables, algorithms, and also message boxes. I know, lots and tons of stuff on this video, but it's all pretty small information, so that's why we're covering quite a bit. First thing we want to talk about is random numbers. Now, a lot of times, and I know this is something kind of strange, but in a program, there's not necessarily what's known as a random number. Random numbers in a computer, in a generated format, are actually created by some form of an algorithm. So this, in our minds, when we say random number, it's not necessarily random, because theoretically, if you look at the algorithm, you would be able to possibly generate it. But looking at our random numbers, there's one thing that we do need to remember when we're creating random numbers in a Visual Basic sense, is we need to use this word randomize at the beginning of the procedure that is using the random number. What that does is it creates a seed in the program that is connected to the clock on the computer that is running. That will make it so that there is a unique random number ran every time that procedure is ran. If you don't have randomized, what will happen is one random number will be created and that's it. It will always create the same random number because it's a formula. The formula is creating the random number, not just randomly pulling out of thin air. So when we're generating our random number, we're going to use the built-in rand function in Visual Basic. Now, this rand function is quite unique in the regards that it generates a number between 0 and 1, but not including 1. Okay? So theoretically, when you're looking at this, it is ultimately going to create a decimal between 0 and 1. Now that's not going to work, right? Because most of the time you don't want to generate a number between a decimal. You don't want to do that. You want to generate, let's say, a number between 5 and 29 or something along those lines. So there's a formula that we can use for random numbers. And I know it looks quite long and quite disgusting looking, but let's describe how this works. So I got int, and then parenthesis, high number minus low number plus 1 times my random number plus the low number. Now you're saying, Marsh, that don't make any sense. Let me explain how this is working. So the random number, remember, this generates numbers between 0 and 1, but not including 1. What this right here does for us is it makes it so that we move the high value, the 1, to be the highest value that we want. So we're going to high number minus low number plus 1. That's going to move it a little bit more than the high number. Okay? Then what we have to do is we have to add the low number because we don't want to start at 0. We want to start at whatever number we want. The int is going to generate and cut off that decimal portion of our number. That causes us to be able to actually hit the number on the nose. Kind of like we can't hit 1 because we're not equal to 1. So we're going to allow that 1 more extra so that we can go over that value. Every time you want to use a random number, you do need to store it in a variable. So ultimately I would have to go maybe make a variable that's an integer, maybe int, guess or something like that, and I'll make that equal to my random number generated. The int, just like I said, just cuts off the decimal portion. Now, you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, she's going to ask us to memorize that information. Oh, honeys, no. This will always be given to you in this class. Now, depending on what languages you might start learning, maybe you start looking at other languages. Some languages have the same formula, especially if you start looking at, like, let's say Java. Java's formula is 100% the same thing. So if you are interested in continuing your programming knowledge, this wouldn't be a bad formula to start looking at / memorizing now. That way you can recognize it if you start studying other programming languages throughout your career as a computer scientist. The other thing we want to talk about is static variables. So whenever you are making a counter variable, we talked about counter variables in our last video. Counter variables is when you're counting like 1, 2, 3, that's going to count how many times someone clicks something. Whenever time you do that, you're going to want to declare those counter variables as a static variable instead of with dim. So normally when we made variables, it's dim, int Bob as integer, right? Well, we don't want to do that. Here's the problem. If you use dim, a variable will be recreated every time through the event procedure unless it's declared as a static variable. So that means every time I click that button, that variable is recreated. So if I wanted to, let's say, track how many times the button is clicked, it won't actually do that. It will reset it every single time. By using static, we will not reset each time the event occurs. The variable's lifetime will last throughout the entire program. Now, let's take a look at this difference in Visual Basic. Let's look at this program here. It's a very simple program. All it is a button, and then also I have a label hiding right here. And if we go into our thing here, we're going to make some code here. So let's make it first a dim variable. That means we're going to recreate this variable every single time this button is clicked. So I'm going to go dim int count as integer. We're going to basically make like a cookie clicker game that some of you guys have played. So I make that variable, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to this variable every time that someone clicks the button. I want to add 1 to that variable. And then what I want to do is I just want to display in that label that variable here. So what this will do for me is it's going to make my counter, and then I'm going to click it, then it'll display. So let's run it. So here's my program right here. I'm going to click me. Notice it says 1 because I clicked the button once. Now I click it again, it says 1 again. No matter how many times I click that button, as you can see, it's several times, I am only getting a 1. It is not allowing me to count that variable. So what I'm going to do to fix that is, instead of a dim here, I'm going to put the word static. What that's going to do is it's going to make this variable be created once and only once. So now if I run this program again, I click me, I got 1 there. Notice now it is actually counting like I wanted it to do. So now every time I click the button, I am not recreating int count. I am just reusing that same spot and not resetting the value. This is very useful, especially if you're doing a counting variable, or what we'll start looking at soon here is also what's known as an accumulator. This variable is very useful when you are trying to track how many times something has been clicked, or you just don't want that variable to reset. That's the main time that you want to use static over a dim variable. The third thing that we want to talk about in this video is called algorithms. And you've probably heard that word before. Algorithms more commonly are faced, like, let's say, in a math class or maybe even a science classroom. A lot of times when you're creating a programmer finds that they need to think through their program before typing code. A very common saying that I find in computer science is 1 hour of planning time saves 3 hours while coding. Because a lot of times you need to decide what kind of variables you need to create, and also it helps you think of all the different case statements that you might need to write, or if statements. Also it helps you figure out all of the possible random things that someone might type into your program. So that gives you guys the idea to kind of save your time as you're programming. These are an algorithm. So all an algorithm is a set of steps that tell you how to solve a program. A lot of you probably know the algorithm of how to multiply numbers or to divide numbers. That is what's known as the algorithm. All it is just a set of steps that we use. These are especially important when we have an application with very complex specifications. Let's say something like a rock, paper, scissors game, or possibly maybe even a like Snapchat or something. A lot of times what people will do is they'll sit down and they'll first figure out the algorithms or get an idea of what they need to write about before they jump in and actually start coding. So a lot of times when I start a program, I am thinking, okay, what do I need this to look like? What do I need to be able to use? What needs to be able to happen? That's the kind of information that we definitely need to start thinking about as we create bigger and bolder programs. And the last thing I want to talk about is message boxes. They are very common. However, it's actually a really fun thing to be able to put into programs. What they are used for very commonly is they're used to display an alert to a user of an invalid data or a reminder of options for the application to continue. All of you have played with message boxes. I would say more commonly what you guys would call these are pop-ups. Okay, they're not as common as they used to be in programs because, well, let's say everyone hates pop-ups, right? But one of the more common reasons to be able to use a pop-up is when you're saying, hey, you didn't type something in right. Okay, that would be you trying to get invalid data or yelling at the user. It's more annoying to deal with a pop-up, so a lot of times they're used sparingly, but it's nice to be able to have that option. How do you code a message box? Well, you can't drag and drop it from the toolbox like everybody else, like the label and the button and all that. We have to actually code it. So in the code, let's say we want to do it if they click a button or something, we're going to type the word message box. Notice it's capital M and capital B. Then we're going to push capital dot and then capital S on show. And then there's two pieces that you need to provide for the program to know. You need to provide a message and, if you wish, it is optional, the title. So over here I got my pop-up box, my message box, and what I wrote for my code, I wrote message box dot show. And then I wrote for the message, I wrote this is a message box. Okay, so the message is what actually will display inside of the pop-up box. The title is what is going to be the name of the window. So in my case, I wrote it as important. So then I was explaining how important it is for this program. So right here is the title, and right here is the message. Those are the more important things on a message box. That's more common that you'll see. And that's the end of this video. Make sure you turn in your digital note sheet to Google Classroom to count as being done. And I hope to see you soon. See you later, Savers.